This is one of my favorite units. Family life. Key to happiness. Some of you might have heard me do this unit before. Some of you came for the first time when I did this unit last year. It really pays to hear it again and again. The Jewish community today is in crisis for many reasons. But one of the most primary reasons, I think, is that according to recent statistics, only 17% of Jewish homes today are nuclear families, mother, father, children. Which means 83% of Jewish homes today are Jews living outside of that core situation, mother, father, children.
What's that in regards to the non-Jewish? Is that the same percentage?
Yeah, it's about the same. Yeah.
Wow.
Which is a general crisis for many people, but especially for Jews, because we treasure our family life as being primary, and our focus and rituals are just built around family life, and perhaps we need to develop better models of family life, or at least respond to the models of the other models of people living single or together with others in certain groups or whatever. But for Judaism, the family is a core, the center of religious life. There are values that go along with this: respect, integrity, individuality. There's an expression that we have called Shalom Bayit. Donan brings it at the bottom page 121. Shalom Bayit. You all know what Shalom means? Peace. And Bayit is a house, home. Shalom Bayit, the peace of the home. That's a primary principle. And we will sacrifice even certain strictures of Jewish law in order to maintain Shalom Bayit, peace of the house. It's held in such high regard.
You even have to have a surrogate family.
Yeah. Now, there are defined roles that different members of the household play, but they're not as clear-cut as you might think. For instance, you might think it's the role of the woman to do all the cooking and the cleaning, and the role of the man to go out and do the work and provide and that sort of thing. And in today's world, we've turned that really topsy-turvy. But if you read in the Talmud says over and over again, Rabbi so-and-so was unavailable on Friday because he was busy cleaning the house and cooking and doing all the work in preparation for Shabbat. So it was clear that there was always a partnership. All these things were a matter of a partnership, and partnership is fundamental. Then there's a wholesome attitude that's very important, especially in terms of sexual relationship, maintaining a sense of spiritual purity in that sexual relationship between men and women, which I'm going to talk about in great detail soon. God has given us certain sexual desires, which are very similar to the passions and desires of the animal kingdom. And that's why we often associate our sexual drives with our animal selves. And then sometimes you'll talk to a person, you say, you're a real animal or something, and you have that in mind. But Judaism recognizes that, doesn't try to hide from it. this is a very fundamental difference between Judaism and Christianity. Christianity holds that sex is evil. And it talks about original sin. Original sin maintains that a man is basically sinful and evil because of these animal drives and desires. Judaism says, no, these are not inherently evil, as you'll see. As I'll explain, sex is not evil. Sex is wonderful, beautiful, it's holy. But it can be evil. If you talk about rape, incest, all kinds of things. You're talking about a certain evilness that goes along with it, or that can go along with it. In essence, Judaism, in its attitude towards sexual relationships, tries to elevate this relationship from the animal kingdom to put it on a very high spiritual plane, the highest spiritual plane. In general, Jewish tradition recognizes the fact that procreation is one of the major purposes of marriage. The Torah tells us, be fruitful and multiply, and so therefore that's what we must do. Be fruitful and multiply. Have children. How many children are the minimum number?
One.
To fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply?
One of each, or some believe 2 boys.
Right. So the Machlokes, it's a dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says a boy and a girl. Beis Shammai says 2 boys. So what if you have 2 boys and a girl, like I do? You fulfill the mitzvah from both sides. We're going to talk a little more in detail about what that mitzvah means and the attitude of Judaism towards birth control and how this particular understanding of this command, be fruitful, multiply, affects the type of birth control that can be used and when it can be used. But procreation is not the only reason for marriage, contrary to what Christian circles say, and I'll get to that in a moment. Donen brings down many statements. In the middle of page 123, it is not good that man should be alone, I will make him a helpmate. This is what the Torah says. One who is not married dwells without blessing, without goodness, without peace. He who has no wife cannot be considered whole, but only half a person. There are many, many statements of this sort, indicating that, in a sense, a very important sense, that sex for the purpose of procreation is not the only reason why one should be married. In fact, sex could have other reasons as well, which we will learn shortly. He says on the top of page 124, primary verse from the Torah. The Torah talks about this in a different context, but certainly, if it was true in that context, it's certainly true in the context of a normal marriage. The end of the first paragraph: her food, her clothing, her conjugal rights, he shall not withhold. So a man is obligated to provide his wife with food, clothing, and conjugal rights. Nothing to do with procreation. Torah says, at the end of I think it's first or second chapter, there comes a time when man shall leave his mother and father, and cling unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Very graphic description. Not a word about procreation. Not a word. What is the abiding principle of relationship between a husband and wife? The abiding principle is a Hebrew word called chesed. Chesed. I've given you that before. Chesed means, what does it mean? It means, we normally translate it as kindness, but it means much more. It's a kind of love that issues from not lust, but it's from an abiding sense of respect and kindness, compassion. Not just passion, but compassion. Uh, anything short of that in a relationship, the relationship will not be abiding. If a man and woman do not relate to themselves in terms of chesed, that kind of loving relationship, this relationship will not endure. Or if it does, it will endure with great pain. Torah looks upon man and wife as being partners. You look at the first two Jews, Abraham and Sarah. They were off on a grand adventure in their lives, and they were no youngsters. I mean, Abraham was 75 years old or so, and Sarah was just a little younger, and they began a new life, leaving Mesopotamia, the riches of that world, and where they both were people of nobility, and they left all that behind to a completely uncertain future to follow God. Well, Torah tells that Sarah prophesies to the or preached to the women, and as Abraham did to the men. And the sages learn that Sarah's gift of prophecy was greater than Abraham's. As a matter of fact, God gives Abraham the best advice for marital happiness. I wish all the men were here to hear this. I'm going to repeat this next time. So Sarah comes to him and Abraham and says, "Listen, I want you to throw out Hagar, who was her handmaiden, whom she gave to Abraham to be a wife when she couldn't conceive, and there was a custom in that part of the world that if you can't conceive and you're a woman of nobility, you give one of your handmaidens to your husband to conceive, and then the child will be born on your knee, will be like your child." Right? So this she did. Except when Hagar became pregnant, she began to taunt Sarah. You know, like, I have the baby, you can't. And later on, when Sarah finally did conceive and bear Isaac, Hagar's child, Ishmael, was a very poor influence on Isaac, and he started, the Torah says, Mesachik, he was playing with him. And the usage of the term and the way it's used in that context, sages learn that playing means he was doing idol worship with him and other things that some people might learn from that, some sort of homosexual connotation there or whatever. So Sarah got incensed and she said to Abraham, "Throw them out. Can't have them anymore." So Abraham goes to God with this problem. "God, what can I do? I mean, I didn't want to marry her, but Sarah forced her on me, and so I did." You know, as you can see in the Bible how much control the men had of their sexual lives. You'll see more and more as you read. The women got together and decided what was, and he said, "Well, and I had this child. He's my only kid. I love him. I mean, it was my first kid. Now we have Isaac, my first kid. I love him very much. How can I throw him out?" So God just reassures Abraham, "Don't worry, I'll watch over them, I'll protect them." And he gives him the best piece of marital advice. Kol asher tomah lach Sarah shema v'kolah. All that your wife Sarah tells you, you listen to her voice. And sages learn from this that Sarah's gift of prophecy and her insight was greater than Abraham's. And he did. And they really had a partnership in life. And that's the way it has to be. As you'll see, that whenever major decisions are needed to be made in a home, a man must consult his wife, or vice versa. This is very important. The chesed has to be the reason, the binding principle of that kind of love that comes from respecting each other's integrity. There's in the Torah now we're dealing with the laws of purity and impurity. And one of the things that's important to discuss is the whole concept of mikveh. What is a mikveh? What does it do? How is it used? A mikveh is a body of water, a natural body of water. The water is called mayim chayim. Mayim chayim. Mayim is water. I want to write it in English, the M-A-Y-I-M. And Chaim, Chaim. Chaim means life, and Mayim is water. Living waters. The waters of life. Mayim Chaim. Scientists tell us that water is a source of life, isn't it? That was a fusion of two hydrogen atoms in the sea that began life through some sort of maybe it was an electrical storm or whatever. We have the image of we are born through water, through the womb. And living waters is a way to get back to that birth and to be reborn every time you immerse in living waters, if that is your intention and focus. Living waters means natural water. It could be an ocean, a lake, a river, a well, any living waters. Matter of fact, women in some communities in Europe that didn't have a functioning mikveh, which I'll talk about in a minute, and once a month they would have to go to the mikveh. They would have to go to a mikveh, or at least immerse themselves in order to renew their marital relationships. There's all kinds of stories about women braving the freezing cold and cutting a hole in the ice and going into the freezing waters once a month in the winter time. You think about what kind of courage that took, and then you think about the Swedes and how they sit in the sauna and then they jump into a pile of ice water afterwards to close their pores. Well, I don't know if these women
Right.
sat in the sauna before they did it, but they all they did it because of the intense desire to have a purified relationship. We'll talk about that in a minute. For one to immerse yourself in a mikveh and to be reborn, one has to do it without anything touching you. The waters have to completely engulf you. So you have to do it without any clothes on. So you go into a mikveh, you go into an ocean or a river or a lake or something like that, and there are people around, so it does not reflect the ideal of modesty. So what we do is we build a well. You can go into a well. Well is standing water, and standing water is not always fresh, right? So what the typical mikveh looks like this today. There are exceptions to it, and every situation is unique. They will have a well, a natural well, with water naturally collecting into it from rainwater. At mikveh at Chabad Bet Tefillah has a system where the gutters that are around the house, the leaders, what do we call them? Leaders or gutters? Gutters around the house. The rainwater comes in from the roof, goes into the gutters, and this comes out into a leader, which just pours right into the well every time it rains. So that's fresh water in there. Now, that's outdoors. Now, indoors, in the building, will be another mikveh, just like it. Another well. And we will fill this well with clean, chlorinated water. Right? And we will heat it. Make sure it's nice and warm, clear. And then there'll be a little hole between that will be opened, and the waters will mix. So like if you take a glass of clear water and you pour a drop of wine in it becomes red instantly. Right? And you know the water's mixed like that. So you'll be in really some of the natural waters will really envelop this water, and you immerse in that water, and you feel, and the waters completely go around you. That's what the modern mikveh typically looks like. Once a month, after a woman menstruates, she waits 7 clean days and goes to the mikveh. Now, the kind of family life that this leads to is very beautiful, I think. There's typically 5 days of menstruation and 7 clean days. According to the Torah, actually, one needs only wait 7 clean days, 7 days from the time the menstruation comes, and if she's clean after those 7 days, she can go to mikvah. But the sages say that the daughters of Israel accepted upon themselves this additional stringency, and waited 7 clean days to make sure the period wasn't coming back, and they immersed themselves in the mikvah. What does this mean? What does this amount to? First of all, for her personally, it's time off.
Time off 14 days.
12 days, 5 days of the menstruation, and 7 days of clean days. It's time off. It's my time. Time for me. Time to be alone. Right? And it's interesting. It's very important, I think, also for couples to learn to communicate with each other in a non-sexual way. For that time, you must communicate with each other in a non-sexual way. As a matter of fact, some couples, Orthodox couples, do it in a manner that they don't even physically touch each other for those 12 days.
I don't think I'd like it.
Well, but I can tell you that the passion that is engendered in that marriage, in that relationship, every single month, with the renewal of the coming together after 12 days, is incredible.
Yeah, but
It's a passion that people feel initially when they first meet, and that most couples don't feel for 20, 30 years after that.
I'd want to be part of my husband's 30 days, whether I touched him or not.
Okay,
I mean, that would be my household.
you live together, obviously. Separate like that. Although I would say that the Ethiopian Jews took it really far, and the women had their own tents. Ethiopian Jews that they lived in for that time period. I don't know if the Ethiopian Jews, now that they come to Israel, still do that sort of thing. But this is a very beautiful way of living, and yes, it could be frustrating at times, but I say the joys that come from it, the use of non-physical communication, all make up for it. I really can't explain it to you until you try it for a while.
In that book, How to Run the Traditional Jewish Household.
Also, Lou Greenberg's book.
Right. She was just saying they don't even touch, though. I mean, just
No physical.
don't. Yeah, I mean, like their car keys, they lay them down on the table, and the man
Right.
picks them up, and
And people typically in an Orthodox household, you'll see, it looks like they have a king-size bed, but what they really have is two
beds.
double beds together. They're just separated an inch or two,
Yeah.
I got that one added.
Rabbi, why is there a different time period after having a child for a boy and girl before
Okay.
you can go to the mikveh? I have a question.
It's a very good question. In yesterday's Torah reading, it says that a woman is considered tameh, spiritually impure, for 2 weeks after a girl, and only for a week after a boy, and then she go to the mikveh.
Circumcision.
Actually, yeah, that's the reason I gave, and it actually works like this. I've heard a lot of reasons for it, but the only reason that really makes sense to me is this: the Torahs are telling you, you give birth to a child, take 2 weeks off. It's your time off. 2 weeks. You deserved it after 9 months at least. You have 2 weeks off. Right? 2 weeks. Hands off. But the women really might not want to do that with the case of a boy, because it's not that the girl engenders more impurity. It's the fact that bris occurs on the 8th day, after 7 days. And she would like to be with her family, hugging and kissing them. And if she's in a state of impurity, she's not supposed to do that. So the Torah allows her to do that, to be able to be at the bris in a state where she can enjoy the celebration with the family.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering
I couldn't
about
understand it
that. I know,
any
I
other
think-
way.
Yeah, it looks from the text like the girl makes you more impure than the boy.
Right.
But that you see, its intention is just the other way around. It's to benefit the wife. Yes.
I heard some Hebrew groups use the excuse of a woman's separation at certain times to justify a man having more than one wife.
Well, no. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, so if a man has more than one wife and they can adjust the cycles of the wives with birth control pills or whatever,
Doesn't work when two women are in the same, get around each other. They end up being.
according to the Torah, a man's allowed to have more than one wife. As you see, it happened in the Torah. But I want to tell you that generally the rule is that in Judaism, men do not have more than one wife, and even in the Torah. Abraham had a second wife, Hagar. He didn't want her. Sarah forced her on him, and he eventually got rid of her. Isaac only had one wife, Rebekah. Jacob had two wives, Rachel and Leah, and their handmaidens. Because when they had trouble conceiving, he married the handmaidens. Jacob only wanted Rachel. But when he worked 7 years and woke up the next morning, he found it was Leah in his bed. Then he was allowed to marry Rachel. Leah was her sister. And then each of them gave him the handmaidens. And they were controlling his sex life. He only wanted to be with Rachel.
He didn't refuse.
Sure did.
Well, he didn't have a right to refuse, he
Oh.
felt. He felt he didn't have a right. He owed it to them not to refuse. If you take a look at all the cases in the Bible where a man has more than one wife, you usually see that there's a extenuating circumstances like this involved. King Solomon had 1,000 wives. Now, could he really live with 1,000 wives? No. What he did was, in order to consolidate his empire, he married the daughters of all the small kingdoms around him. He didn't really live with them. It was political.
But they didn't want to live with him then, too.
It was a political. They could be they're married to the king. It was a big status for them, you know. It was. I guess in the sense it was mutually beneficial. You take a look at all the sages in the Talmud, a listing of the sages, thousands of sages and their wives. Never find an instance in the entire Talmud about a man having more than one wife. Rabbis discourage it. As a matter of fact, in the Rabbeinu Gershom, I think around the 10th century, put a ban on polygamy. A man's not allowed to have more than one wife. So Jews are not allowed to do it today. And we don't. Yes.
So now, how you explain in nature, women outnumber men like maybe 8 to 1?
8 to 1? No, I think it's like about 55% women and 45% men, something like that. But not in all communities. Some communities have more men than women.
So, what you...
I mean, that's probably why the Torah allowed it, because if there was a circumstance where there was so many more women. But the band, it's not true. It just looks like there are more women around in circles that you keep. But the statistics from the Census Bureau in the United States is something like 48% men and 52% women in the United States.
Well, if you look at Alaska, I mean, obviously the men outnumber the women up there,
That's right.
but
Okay. Today, unfortunately, these laws of family purity, of use of mikveh, has been greatly neglected, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about it. And I think it's a shame. And people have all kinds of queasy feelings when they talk about mikveh. They hear all the stories from their grandparents or something, and about some dirty mikvahs that were in deep holes somewhere in the basements of whatever. If you go look at the mikvahs in this community, the one in B'nai Torah is beautiful mikvah. The one in Chabad, Beth Tfilah is a beautiful mikvah. Beth Jacob is going to be in the process of rebuilding their mikvah to make it beautiful. You go in New York to some of the big communities like Aflapish, you have these big mikvahs where there's not one mikvah, there's about 8 of them, and there's several attendants, and you have to be perfectly clean before you go in, so you go into a bathroom first and take a shower if you haven't done it at home, or you can bathe first. And then they'll have like a salon afterwards when you come out. They'll have, the still have women blow drying your hair and doing your nails, and you really take your time. It's your time. So there are mikvahs and there are different mikvahs, different kinds. It can make it as beautiful and wonderful experience as you can imagine. And I think that anybody any married couple who really doesn't, a Jewish couple who doesn't try living in this life has missed out on something very important and fundamental. Okay, before I'm going to leave the chapter for a second, and I'm going to proceed and discuss in more detail the attitude of Judaism towards human sexual relationships, and I think it's really primary. Again, in Christian tradition, marriage was a concession to the weakness of the human will. What does it say in Paul and applied to the Corinthians who were recent converts stated, this is in the book of Corinthians, if they cannot contain themselves, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn in hell. It's a terrible sin to have sex, but at least get married. At least get married so you won't burn in hell. That's why, in essence, in the Catholic Church, and I have to use that as the example, the model, because it's probably pure Catholicism, perhaps. It's a teaching of virginity there, which was a radical break from the Old Testament. Put in where marriage had to almost justify its own existence. And why was virginity placed in such high esteem in Christian circles? It was because of this original sin concept that I mentioned before. Man is basically evil. And one of the evil drives, the basic drives of man is sex, so this is part of his evilness. People really believe this. I remember having this conversation with a fundamentalist Christian who was sitting next to me on an airplane. I was going to California to visit my in-laws. And they saw the yarmulke on my head, and we got a conversation. He was a Bible Belt fundamentalist Christian, and he really believed in the concept of original sin. The kids are basically evil. I said, what? He said, yeah, take a look at kids where they play and grab and take, and that's evilness. We have to train them, take this evilness out of them. It was very, very hard for me to listen to that. And I said, you really believe that? You really believe? Well, Judaism's basic premise is from I could quote you from the Talmud, which we recite every morning. Elokai neshama shenatata bitori, O Lord, the soul that you give me is pure. Pure. We are born pure. If we louse up our lives, that's what we do. We are in a state of purity, though, when we come into this world. Man is basically good. Jews are basically optimists, look for the good in man and in mankind. And since sex is a basic drive of man, it's basically good as well. Remember I quoted before the basic verse for procreation, Peru, revu, be fruitful, multiply. But what happens when pregnancy would be difficult for the woman, or the doctor says you ought not to get pregnant because I don't think your body can take it anymore, or be a threat to your life, or that you need to rest a little bit between kids, or of that sort. Huh? Okay. Judaism, well, Christians might have a problem with this. Certainly, Catholic Church has a big problem with using contraception. For Judaism, sex is an essential part of marriage, and even though procreation cannot be accomplished for one reason or another, you shouldn't desist from having sex. And I'll get to that why maybe today. I want to insert a note here about premarital and extramarital sex. The Torah specifically forbids only 5 categories of sex. Okay? Who could name some? I remember the time I was I had a late Friday night service for our children. I was due once a month when they do the service, and for some reason or another, someone forgot to bring a Kiddush cup with the wine, so I sent someone to get it. And while we were waiting, I talked about the Torah portion of that week, which was about the 10 Commandments. So I asked the children if anybody can name one of the commandments. So a little kid raises his hand. What? Thou shalt not commit adultery. See that from a little 7-year-old. It was very funny. So, obviously, fortunately, kids see it all around today. Adultery is forbidden. 4 other categories forbidden sex. Incest. Incest is not best, as this expression might go. Adultery, incest.
Health.
Huh?
Health.
Health? No, that's not.
Dangerous.
Well, it's forbidden because it's dangerous if sex is dangerous, but it can be seen that way, but it's not forbidden because of the relationship. What other relationships?
What about with the non-Jews?
I'm talking about inherent relationships, homosexuality, okay, bestiality. And there's one other category which you won't get, called znut. Znut. I would say Z-N-U-T, or in Hebrew, Zayin Nun Vav Taf. Znut. A zona is a prostitute in Hebrew. But this is not real prostitution. It's a vague term, often connoting prostitution. But I personally feel it reflects the same fundamental prohibition contained in the first 4 categories. What do the other 4 categories all have in common? They eventually lead to the breakup of the family unit. Nothing will destroy a family more than adultery, certainly incest, certainly homosexuality. I mean, if a man leaves his wife because of another man, or a woman leaves her husband because of another woman, certainly bestiality, all these things. So in this context, znut is the kind of promiscuous activity that leads to the breakup of the family.
When would it not lead to the breakup of the family? I mean, if your husband's going...
It would. That's why it's forbidden. That's why it's forbidden. So, but for instance, if you practice a form of behavior before you marry, premarital sex, and used to having multiple sexual partners, if you begin a kind of framework and activity like that, how are you going to stop after you get married? Will that lead to a healthy family life? Probably not. So that might be forbidden. In Judaism, the primary vehicle for sexual activities is marriage. And although the primary goal of marriage is procreation, it's not its only function. Companionship, personal fulfillment are exalted in Jewish tradition, even incorporated into the legal language of the codes. Eventually, these elements of marriage took on almost equal importance. For instance, the Talmud gives a case. If a man married a woman and remained with her for 10 years, and she has not yet given birth, he's not allowed to neglect further the duty of procreation. So Rashi comments, what should he do? In his commentary, either divorce her or add a second wife. However, as we said, monogamy is the ideal, and as a matter of fact, polygamy is forbidden today, so you can't do that.
Where does adoption come
Adopting a child?
in? Yeah.
adoption is wonderful. It's a great mitzvah, but it does not. You do not fulfill your responsibility to be fruitful, and multiply through adoption.
But if you
Because
can't
you're not
multiply,
multiplying. You're not
if you
being.
can't multiply, at least you got a child. Though.
Yeah, so you're doing a great mitzvah. It's a different mitzvah. No, I mean, it's not your fault that you can't have children. When the Bible says, "I will make a fitting helper for him," when God talks about Adam, it doesn't say helpers, helpmates. It's in the singular. So without polygamy, though, does a man with a childless woman have to divorce his wife of 10 years of a loving marriage? The reply among the scholars was absolutely not. Again, in a case where pregnancy was not possible, but to be avoided because of health, contraception, and contraception was the prescription. Actually, it's because of shalom bayit. We talked about the peace of the house that must be maintained, and if you divorce a wife or a husband, it's really not you're really not maintaining shalom bayit, peace of the house. In marriage in Jewish tradition is the ideal state for human being. The Zohar says the divine presence rests only upon a married person, because an unmarried person is but half a person. Something's missing. In other words, in Kabbalistic terms, when God created Adam, and Eve, what he did was first he made Adam. Adam was an androgynous human being, both male and female, not like Pat. Really had both elements, right? Both elements, male and female. And when he created woman, it's not that he created woman. What he did was he took the rib of man. What was he doing? He was separating the female element from the male element. Well, then there's still some residue of each. But what happens is it's like a soul is broken, and they seek to unify. And that's what happens in the marriage when you have your soulmate. You're unified in such a fundamental way. And it brings such glory and joy to you because you know this is right. This is where it's supposed to be. And it's your other half. Right? And so if you're all alone, you're but half a person in the sense that you're not united with that other half, that soulmate, and there is a soulmate for everybody. There are different expressions. Yiddish expression is a cover for every pot, that sort of thing. But I prefer to look of it in Kabbalistic terms. There really is. There is a soulmate. The Talmud states if one has children, they may decease from procreation, but not from marriage. There are times when one must postpone marriage. The Torah tells us that a man might not be ready for marriage. The Talmud says, "Banavai chadash, natakarim va'az eras." First, it's a very great prescription for marriage. I remember in my time when I was in my early 20s, which was a long time ago. But a lot of my friends were marrying in 2021, and almost every single one of them got divorced. Here's the prescription of the Talmud: one should build himself a new house. In other words, you should have a place to live. One should plant a vineyard. You should have a job. You should earn money. Then you can get married. Then you should get married. I think the 90s have seen the reversal of that, and people are a little more practical with it when they look into a marriage situation. There's very few couples come to for me to get married at that young, tender age. Also, a man may defer marriage, as the Talmud states, until he finds one suitable to him. Otherwise, in marrying a woman he will not love, he will come to violate the commandment, love thy neighbor. Isn't that interesting? Also, there is the commonly known practice of delaying a marriage past the recommended age of 18. You consider a person was working already after bar mitzvah, so at 18 they're ready to get married, in order to further one's study.
I'll take Josh.
Well, yeah, you have to go to college, you have to go learn more Torah, you have to,
I'll take him.
go to law school,
Yeah, I'll take him.
medical school, whatever. Then it's time to get married. So what do we have here? We have here a relationship between a man and a woman that has two basic elements to it: procreation and pleasure, all based upon chesed, that special love, kindness, compassion. So the two basic elements of a sexual relationship between a man and a woman are pleasure and procreation. So, did I finish up about premarital sex? Premarital sex is not specifically forbidden in the Torah, while there's a penalty for all the others: homosexuality, bestiality, incest, adultery. What's the penalty? Death. How is the death penalty carried out in the Torah? Stoning, hanging, whatever it was. But someone had to have seen the two of you before you did it and warned you not to do it, and then seen you do it, and then reported it to the Jewish court. In other words, the death penalty for sexual misconduct was never really carried out. Rarely, if ever. The idea was it's a sin worthy. Some of the other consequences of, for instance, a child born to a forbidden sexual relationship is called a mamzer. A mamzer is a bastard. That's the only definition of an illegitimate child. Child born through it could be through homosexuality or bestiality. So it has to be either through incest or adultery. It's called a mamzer.
Is that Hebrew or Jewish?
That's Hebrew. From the Torah.
What about a child born from rape?
Well, we'll get to it right now. So let's say a single woman is raped. Is that an illegitimate child? No, because a single woman, what is the penalty for premarital sex in the Torah? There is no penalty. It just says znut, this kind of promiscuous sexual activity that lends to the breakup of marriage, however you define it. The Hasidic community, or a very Orthodox community, might define it that you shouldn't touch an unmarried woman. You shouldn't be alone in a room with an unmarried woman. You may take it to that extent. You may define it differently, but the Torah does not define it. There is no penalty for it in the Torah. And a child born of that relationship is not considered illegitimate. The problem comes about when a child is born, the usual problem, when a child is born to a married woman, the father of the child is not her husband. That's an illegitimate child. However you'd want to define it. However, there have been great scholars of our generation, like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, may he rest in peace, who died about 5 or 6 years ago, was able to, even in this instance, find ways of legitimizing a child, bending the rules of the Torah so legitimize a child. He would take a case sometimes where men and women were married in America. The husband went off to Israel and didn't come back, and 10 years later the woman gets pregnant and has a child. They never got a Jewish divorce, so they were technically married. We'll discuss divorce in more detail later. They were technically married, so she has a child, so it's from somewhere other than a husband. So is this child illegitimate? Well, what we do today in a circumstance like that, we try to find a way of making the marriage, the original marriage, finding some sort of defect in the marriage. If the marriage was not legitimate, the original marriage, she wasn't married, then the child is okay. And there's ways of doing that. And we try in cases like that to be as compassionate as possible, and very, very often there are solutions found.
What am I trying to remember in the studying that this illegitimate could not be a legitimate child, and he got married, and if he were a slave for so many years?
If he was a slave, if a Jewish slave, then he could marry a non-Jewish slave.
That was
In
the
other words,
end result of this.
Yeah. So what happens is a mamzer, an illegitimate child, not allowed to marry a Jew. So that's why it's such. If a couple thinking about adultery would realize the gravity of this, they'll understand. So not allowed to marry a fellow Jew. So who could they marry? They have to marry someone who's not Jewish. Or possibly a convert, because then they can be converted after they get married. And it's a mess. The thing is to avoid these kinds of illicit sexual relationships. So premarital sex, although is not specifically forbidden in that sense, in the sense of carrying the penalty of illegitimacy in terms of the child, or any stringent penalties in the Torah, nevertheless is a very difficult thing, and how you describe what znut is will depend upon your sense of values. But know that the Torah states the primary place for sexual relationships are in marriage. Having said that, I want to talk about the two elements of marital relationships, procreation and pleasure. I'll touch on procreation today, and we'll deal much more with pleasure next week.
After it's done.
Okay. Procreation I mentioned before. The biblical verse, be fruitful, multiply, Peru or Gu, beginning of Genesis, verse 28, first chapter. The Mishnah defines this injunction, be fruitful, multiply, as, and I mentioned this before, the school of Shammai says he has fulfilled his duty with 2 sons. The school of Hillel says a son and a daughter. As is written, male and female he created them. The Jewish law, the halacha, follows the school of Hillel, and hence the statutory obligations is discharged when a couple sort of replaces themselves. Now, what happens, if you're like Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof and you have 5 daughters? I mean, how long do you keep trying with your poor wife? Leave her alone. Obviously, the halacha says you can discharge your obligation, be fruitful, multiply in terms of a son and daughter through your grandchildren.
I know a doctor in this town has 5 girls and finally got the boy.
Okay, good for him.
He kept at it.
Good for him. Girls are the best, though. Anyway, I'm partial. You're right. There are 2 rabbinic injunctions that further define the mitzvah of procreation. The first is referred to as La Shevet. La Shevet. It's based upon a verse in Isaiah 45, chapter 45, verse 18. Lo tov v'ra la shevet yitzara, not for waste did God create the world, the earth. He created it to be inhabited. So therefore, it is our duty to continue to contribute to the world's habitation. So it's our obligation to continue to contribute to the habitation of the world. That goes beyond fulfilling the injunction to be fruitful and multiply. Yes?
Back to Isaiah. It's some chapter in Isaiah where it say, in this day, 7 women should take hold of one man. Can you explain to me what that means?
Say that again?
It's some chapter where it says, in this day, 7 women should take hold of one man.
You'll have to show me where that is.
Kill him.
And I'll explain it to you. I have to do it in context.
Next week I have.
Okay? You read it.
Okay, because I want to get some understanding on that.
The second rabbinic injunction is referred to as la'erev. It's based upon a verse in Ecclesiastes. Beautiful verse, chapter 11, verse 6. I won't read you the Hebrew. In the morning sow thy seed, in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which shall prosper, this or that, or whether they shall both be alike good. In other words, since you don't know what fate has in store for you when you sow your seed in the morning, you plant your crops. In the evening, you should do something else too, just in case the crops are wiped out. You won't be wiped out. Right? And the rabbis apply this also to sowing your seed, also to having children in your seed. That you don't know what's going to happen to a child. God forbid the child could grow up and something can happen, an accident, die before they were able to procreate. They're not considered viable children or whatever. You don't know what's going to happen, so you should continue to have children while you still have strength. In considering these rabbinic injunctions, it should be understood that they are not merely arbitrary extensions of the Mishnah, but rather a guarantee of its enforcement. Furthermore, giving birth by itself is not enough. One must give birth to viable children who will themselves be able to procreate. The purpose of the biblical injunction, be fruitful, multiply, is lashevet, as we said, in habitation. Therefore, if a man has only one son, but his son had a daughter, his own duty is then discharged. But since one may not be sure that he will meet the minimal requirements till his children are grown, his only guarantee is to continue to try to go beyond the minimum. Therefore, Maimonides codifies, although a man has fulfilled the mitzvah of be fruitful, multiply, he is commanded by the rabbis not to desist from procreation while he yet has strength. And so the notion of birth control may be practiced after the birth of children cannot be reasonably assumed. However, recent response does permit birth control in such circumstances. Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who was the chief rabbi of Israel about 20 years ago or so, was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi. This is in 1975. Issued a decree permitting the use of the pill if a couple has already a son and a daughter. Permitting the use of the pill if a son. One can conduct a proper discussion today on the importance of man propagating his species without referring to the real problem of population control. But I want to talk about it. Aside from, we'll talk more in detail about birth control after we get to the pleasure principle. But I want to end with this question today. There's much talk about the world being overpopulated. The hundreds of millions of people in India, and Bangladesh, the billions of people in China. It's a big thing to work to control the population of the world, so we'll be able to feed everybody. Besides, these proponents of birth control and population control say, do we have a right to bring into this evil world more people and therefore more suffering? Following this line of reasoning, the Jew should certainly practice birth control because experience has taught that the Jew that is offering might be subject to cruel oppression and persecution. However, adoption of this attitude is always unthinkable for the Jew. The Talmud refers to King Chizkiah, who prophetically saw that his offspring would be wicked in the vision. And so he desired to desist from marriage and procreation. Isaiah scolded him, saying, the secrets of God are none of your business. You have to perform your obligation and do what's pleasing to God and have children. The responsa literature has not fully dealt with the problem of population explosion, because it's really only recently become a problem, an issue. Unfortunately, the Jewish community was never in a position to aggravate the problem of population control, but quite the contrary, we practice it. The average Jewish home has 1.65 children or something like that. Don't ask me what a 0.65 child looks like. But that's true. We practice zero population growth with a vengeance. You know?
What happened to all of King Solomon's wives? How many kids did they give him?
He didn't live with them, so he didn't
But I
have
mean,
them.
he could have lived with them just once. He didn't have to live with them. How many children did they appropriate?
I don't know. I don't know if it's listed like that. There are a listing of his children in the Book of Kings, but I don't think that listed all the children from all of his wives. We don't know. While the possibility of physical hazard and fundamental welfare of existing children may be considered in the practice of birth control, self-indulgence and convenience are never justified. The moral prescription for the 20th century is obvious: be fruitful, multiply to the fullest extent. In other words, you know, if you're in a situation where you're completely starving to death, you don't have what to feed your own children, so you wanted to stop from having more children at this time, or you're nursing and you don't want it to becoming pregnant might interfere with the nursing cycle or whatever. You know that you can make a case for that. But I mean it was abhorrent to me that my first congregation in New Jersey, when abortion became legal, and I had a congregant who was running an abortion clinic, a doctor, and the Jewish women from the community would just line up outside because they had a 3-bedroom house or 4-bedroom. They didn't have an extra bedroom, or they've already been through that stage in their lives. They don't have to bother with kids now or whatever. I mean, that was really upsetting to me. God blesses you with a child. Soul comes into your body at conception. You have a responsibility and obligation there, and we'll talk in detail about when is abortion permitted, but clearly not in this case. What about the non-Jewish world? Does Jewish law find it permissible for Gentiles to engage in population control? And can we encourage the Gentiles to participate in population control?
Well, be fruitful and multiply, that was to all mankind, wasn't it?
Okay. We'll read you what Rabbi Yechiel Epstein, who died in 1908, wrote. As to the habitation of the world, all the human race is equal in this responsibility. Even though a mitzvah does not attach itself to each individual among the Gentiles, the obligation rests upon the generality of mankind to increase the world's population in accordance with God's will, as expressed to Adam and Noah and his sons. Israel, the mitzvah, was attached to each individual, just as the other mitzvot are. The Gentiles who were not given the other mitzvot, the other commandments, were not given this one as a mitzvah for themselves, to individuals. But the blessing of God was on all humanity to increase and multiply and concern itself with the habitation of the world. In other words, we have the 7 mitzvot of Adam, of Noah, 7 commandments of Noah. Be fruitful, multiply wasn't one of them. But it was a general thing that God said to the world that this is what he wanted them to do. But for a Jew, a mitzvah in the Torah becomes a personal obligation. There are Talmudic sources that permit contraception or the abstinence of marital relations during a famine or other calamities. Personally, I find it hard to understand that although the Talmud and codes point to the verse, be fruitful, multiply, and fill up the world, the rest of the verse says, and fill up the world, nobody really comments on that part. Fill up the world. What happens when the earth is full?
You have a war and kill them half off and start over.
Yeah. We're going to have a terrible disease afflict the world, or whatever.
They used to always say that that's why there were wars.
Yeah. Well, to the extent that continued rate of expansion will bring more habitation than the earth can bear, maybe we should do something about it. Maybe we can be engaged in this. Maybe it's not really a double standard for Jews to say that although we should not participate in population control because we Jews, after all, we just lost 6 million. We haven't even begun to replace them. What we're doing now is we're losing more and more Jews every year. We shouldn't be in the business of promoting population control among Jews. In fact, we should all go home and have big families. But on the other hand, I don't think it's contradictory to say that in terms of the world, when we feel that the world is becoming full, at least in certain areas, it may be that we can participate in developing a program of population control in other parts of the world, where the people can't feed themselves, and that won't be hypocritical. Because we have the mitzvah to be fruitful, multiply. Personally, every person in the world doesn't have that obligation, especially if we consider the fact that the world is full. Yes.
If Israel is our land,
Yeah.
our country,
Yeah.
and we would want it all Jews, we couldn't put the 6 million into Israel.
True. Very good. If every Jew in the world would go back to Israel today, we'd find a place for them. Don't worry.
Oh, that's
Though you'd say it's impossible.
that's talk.
If you
yes.
say it's impossible, but we Jews have been doing the impossible for a long time.
But 6
And there's an
million-
old story. There's an old story about Henry Kissinger and I forgot I don't know the details of some of these great people in government were sitting and discussing the problems in the Middle East, and this is impossible, and this is possible, and how can you do it? And one of them just innocently turned to them and said, "But you're thinking in terms of Gentiles. These are Jews. Jews have been doing the impossible for a long
All right,
time."
when we go over this summer, if you figure on where we could each buy
Plenty of land in
sites,
Israel. Plenty
and
of land
how,
in
where,
Israel.
how many we can put
You'll
in.
see it. You'll see it. There's plenty of land in Israel. Next week, I'm going to talk about the pleasure principle. Bring your spouses. Bring your significant others, if you have, and let them hear it, because it's very important to understand these principles and how Judaism views them. All with the abiding principle of chesed, of love and kindness and compassion.